Hello everybody and welcome to 30 minutes of a lunchtime chat today for Whole Women's Week and International Women's Day. I'm Christina Lewis and I've got the fabulous job of speaking to women from all across the region this week about their jobs, about their lives and their journeys up to this point. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Diana Johnson, who is the Labour MP for Hull North. Diana, I can't imagine how busy you are at the moment, so thank you for taking the time to join us.
Oh, you're very welcome, and happy International Women's Day or Women's Week to everybody.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, the first thing I'd like to start with is that obviously you have been an MP since 2005, and in fact the first female MP in Hull. Can you just tell us a bit about your journey into politics up to that point?
Yes, of course. Well, I'd always been interested in what was going on in the world. I remember when I was a little girl, I used to love watching the news, and my family always had the radio on, and my dad had newspapers. We had lots of newspapers in our house. So I kind of grew up being interested in what was happening in the world. And then when I was in my teens, Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, and she was obviously the very first woman we'd ever had as Prime Minister in the country.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued by her. And as much as I didn't agree with her politics, I just thought it was really interesting that there was a woman leading the country. And I started to realise there were very few women in Parliament. I think it was 20 perhaps at that time. And I thought that wasn't right. Seeing the House of Commons just full of men in suits, I thought that's not a good way of running the country and making laws. So I'd always got it in my head that I thought being a member of Parliament would have been a really interesting job. But of course, you can't just become a member of Parliament. And I decided I wanted to become a lawyer. So I read law at university, and you'll know there's lots of lawyers in the House of Commons, because I think once you're a lawyer, you realise as well that if you don't agree with the laws, you need to be in the House of Commons to change them. So I became a lawyer, but I was always really interested in politics. So I stood as a local councillor. I got really involved in that. I also got involved with the NHS. There are positions in the NHS for lay people on the boards of various NHS bodies, and I got involved in that. And I just really enjoyed the cut and thrust of debate and making things happen. And then in 2001, I stood in an unwinnable Labour seat. Actually, it was a seat where I was really just having a go, and I enjoyed that. And I thought, well, if a seat came up, I'd have a go again for the following general election. And I was lucky in Hull. They'd never had a woman MP in Hull, and women had been able to stand to be MP since 1918. So it took Hull 87 years to get its first woman to stand and be elected. And I was lucky because my party, the Labour Party, had decided that there were still too few women in politics. And they said that if any Labour member of Parliament was going to retire or stand down, then 50% of those seats had to go to women only shortlists. So it would ensure that a woman would be elected. And Hull had really long-standing MPs at that point. Kevin McNamara had been the MP in Hull North for 39 years, and he declared he was going to retire. And the party said, right, well, we'll have Hull North as one of the seats where we want to make sure we have a woman MP, never having had a woman in the city. And I was very fortunate. It's like any job you apply for. I had to fill in a form and a CV. I had to be interviewed by local party members and persuade them that I was the best person to stand for them. And then once I'd got through that, which was in 2004, I then had to wait for the general election in 2005. And then I was very fortunate to be elected in May 2005, which was amazing. And it's been, the biggest honour of my life, really, to represent the people of Hull North. I can never get over the fact when you walk into the House of Commons, although we can't do that at the moment, but when you walk in there and you sit on those green benches, it's a huge privilege, a huge privilege.
Yeah, I can imagine it must be quite surreal. I mean, obviously someone like me who's only ever seen it from the outside, but it's so ingrained, isn't it, in our culture, in what we read about and we see, to actually go in there and sit down on their seats must be a huge feeling.
It is. And I think one of the criticisms of it, though, is it's very adversarial. And there was a view that that may put women off because we face each other, the Conservatives and the Labour, we face each other. And you'll know we don't always stay quiet. We can shout and make noises and make comments, and that can be difficult, I think. However, I think once you're in there, and especially around Prime Minister's question time, you know, you want your person to do well. So there's that sense, like when you're on the football, you know, watching your football team with wanting them to win and do well. So you do get a bit carried away sometimes, and it's a bit of a badge of honour if the speaker calls you out and says, "Oh, you know, the honourable lady must be quiet," you know, that kind of thing. That's seen as a bit of a good thing, actually.
I can imagine when you're in the middle of it, it's actually quite electric, you know,
Yes.
when everyone's shouting, and it
Yeah.
must be really quite exciting.
It is, and it's quite theatrical as
Yeah.
well, I think. You know, the set pieces like the budget, which we've had, the Prime Minister's question time, they're big set pieces and they're theatrical, and you know, Parliament is usually all squashed in together into the chamber, and
Mm,
it is electric. But to be frank with you, the vast majority of time in the Commons, it's not like that. It is serious. We are trying to make laws or debate important issues, and so I
mm,
think on the whole, you know, we don't normally behave in the way that you'll see us on a Wednesday lunchtime behaving. We try and, you know, be respectful and courteous and try and get through the business. So, and I
mm.
think particularly cross-party work, there's an enormous amount of cross-party work where you know, we just get on and we want to do the best for our constituents, and that means working together rather than just arguing all the time.
Mm. Um, so, as I previously mentioned, you were the first female MP in Hull, elected in 2005. When that happened and when you were elected, what was the reaction? Did you have any resistance from other MPs or constituents because you were female, or was it a case of huge celebration?
That's a very good question. Reflecting back now 16 years, um, I think it's fair to say that not everybody in my own party, in the Labour Party, supported all women shortlists. So
Mm,
there was some uh, concern about that. So that's one thing. I think also, as I said to you, the MPs in Hull had been very long-standing. You know, John Prescott,
yeah.
Kevin McNamara. In fact, Alan Johnson at that point was the young one because he'd only been elected in 1997. But I was obviously different. I looked different for a start,
Mm,
and it helped me on in things like standing on a school gate. I could go and stand on a school gate and talk to mums and dads in a
yeah.
way that perhaps sometimes some of our more traditional MPs perhaps didn't feel as comfortable doing.
Mm,
So it gave me, and it got a lot of publicity, and that was positive as well, that I was the first woman. um, I think though, you know, there is still misogyny and sexism, and particularly as an MP, because your job is to be a bit mouthy and to say what you think and to stand up for your constituents, that
mm,
doesn't always go down well. And I've certainly come across people who don't like necessarily what I say, but also I think there is a bit of misogyny in there as well, because I think if a man had said it, that he wouldn't have had the same reaction. So I think, unfortunately, yeah, I have come across misogyny and sexism. I think in Parliament, we've got a lot better. And I think, you know, in the
mm,
16 years I've been in Parliament, we've seen more and more women come in, particularly younger women and women who've had families whilst they've been MPs and have managed to do that and been brilliant MPs. I'm just thinking today of Annalise Dodds, who's our Shadow Chancellor, who's got
yeah.
2 young children and is doing, you know, one of the most important jobs in opposition. So there's lots of really good, talented women around in politics. And I think, you know, that's certainly, the numbers have increased on both sides of the House of Commons. So it's not just Labour women. There's lots of Conservative women, and there's lots of SNP women as well. So I think
Mm.
that's all to the good, and I think that makes us a better Parliament, makes us more reflective of what's going on in the world, more understanding of the issues that people and women particularly are concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so what more do you think? I mean, obviously you've kind of very much touched upon the fact that you have seen change over the past 16 years, which is brilliant. But at this point now, what more needs to be done to support women in politics or into a career in politics?
Well, I think one of the big things at the moment that probably puts women off is the abuse that you get, not just as a politician, but in public life on social media. I think there's a real issue there about the way women are treated on social media. So, I'm just thinking particularly around Meghan Markle, who has,
Yeah.
suffered a lot of abuse on social media. But politicians, I mean, Diane Abbott has been a politician for many years and is a black Labour woman politician. And I think she gets more abuse than probably the rest of us put together. Death threats, rape threats, all of that kind of thing. And I think that's something as a society we have got to sort out, that how we use social media and the rules around it, because that's, I think, putting a lot of women off. So that's one thing. I think secondly, the pandemic actually has shown that there are modern ways of working which still allow you to do your job. So Parliament at the moment isn't functioning that we can all turn up and sit in the chamber, but we've got a digital Parliament and we're able to vote from home and things like that. And I think that helps not just women, but people who've got caring responsibilities or people who are perhaps ill. So I think there are some reforms that Parliament needs to make about its ways of working to be more inclusive. There's always been that issue about we work quite long hours, and
Yeah.
on Monday night in particular we work till 10 o'clock and we can be voting after 10 o'clock, and that's not very family friendly. But if you could do that, by electronic voting, that would help deal with some of those problems. So I think there's those kind of practical things that Parliament could do. And
Mm.
I think the third thing is for women in politics and in public life to mentor and to encourage other women to come forward and stand. And I've always taken the view that, I've been incredibly fortunate in my career to have had women along the way who've either said to me, have you thought of standing, or why aren't you standing for for a political position, or this is what I think you should do. And I just think we need to encourage each other and
Yeah.
back each other up and support each other. So those are the three things that I think
Mm.
are important about getting more women into politics in particular.
I think the issue of social media in particular is huge, as you say. I mean, it's such a faceless thing, isn't it? So just behind a keyboard targeting one particular person, and to be subject to that, as you say, Diane Abbott has been continually, must need such a strength of character.
Yes, and I think the other thing is that you get to a point where you can't look at social media, and,
Yeah.
and that often means that members of your staff look at it, because obviously we need to report if we get. I mean, I've had death threats. They need to be reported to the police. Things like that. And it's soul destroying, not just for you, but for your staff as well. That they have to look at that kind of comment. But I think there is something just fundamentally wrong that I doubt any of the people who've said horrible. And I'm not talking about people who just disagree with me on a political issue,
Yeah.
but people who are threatening, who make sexual comments, those kind of things. I never in a month of Sundays would any of those people, I imagine, come up to my face and say that. But
Mm.
somehow it's acceptable sitting in your bedroom to be able
Yeah.
to type these things and feel you can get away with it and there's no repercussions. So
Yeah.
we need to sort that out, and I think Parliament is really aware of the need to act on that. And in fact, the government are bringing forward a bill shortly called the Online Harms Bill, and I'm hoping that in that there will be measures about how we start to tackle this behaviour, and that it's not acceptable, and that action is taken if you indulge in it.
Yeah. So, if there are any women out there who would like to start a career in politics or just on the threshold of it, what advice would you give them?
Go for it. You just have to go for it. And I think one of the phrases that often I think women feel that they need to be absolutely 100% prepared before they'll apply for a job or
Yeah.
take that next step in a career. And the thing I've learned is that sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. So, sometimes you've just got to put that, put your suit on, put some lipstick on, just think, right, I can do this and go for it. And
Yeah.
of course, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. In fact, recently I stood up in the House of Commons in a really serious speech about, it was about the security of the country, actually. And I made a speech and I meant to say circumscribed, and I said circumcised rather. And I could see the minister looking at me, trying hard not to laugh. So, we all make mistakes. And in a way, I just had to kind of think, oh God, and then just carry on. So I
Mm.
think it is about just have a go. And often, I think the big secret is that men often will say, oh yes, I know all about this, I can do this, and actually, when you get in there and you have a go, you think, well, I can do this too, and I can find out about X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
So I think it is about that. Just have a go and be confident. I think, I'm 54 now, and I look back to when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I think I should have just been much more confident. But it's hard. It's really hard with confidence. But confidence. So fake it until you make it is my advice.
That's great advice. I don't know what you think, but I mean, I think women have a tendency, and I don't want to pigeonhole, but to be a lot harder on ourselves.
Mm.
Like you said, there's that expectation that you have to prepare to the nth degree. And I sometimes think with men, perhaps there's more of that ability to have a bit of bravado and kind of that outward confidence, which maybe, women don't have as much sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think really, as you perhaps get a bit older, you realise that bravado, it's yeah, it does. I have come across, MPs in the House of Commons. I think there's no MP where I think, how amazing they are in terms of, because they're a man and they're full of bluster. I think the ones I'm really impressed by are the ones who just get on and do stuff and make things happen. And often, the ones who make what was it, that expression about those who make the loudest noise are often the emptiest vessels. So I
Yeah.
think, sometimes quietly confident, getting on with it.
Mm.
That's the way to go.
My mum's advice was always, it's not what you say, it's what you do, which I've
Yeah,
always tried to stick by because I think
yeah,
it's really good advice.
yeah. I think that's excellent advice. And these
Mm.
these sayings from women are really important because it really does sum up really how we should live our lives.
So, politically for you at the moment, what do you think are the main issues facing women in general?
Well, I think facing all of us at the moment is COVID still and
Yeah,
the COVID recovery and what's going to happen. I mean, we're all desperate, aren't we, to go back to some form of normality.
yeah.
But I think women, particularly, have been really very hard hit by COVID, in terms of just, a lot of the jobs that women have work in have been very affected. The hospitality sector's one key one.
Mm.
Homeschooling, having children at home, that's been a huge issue mainly for women. So I think, and obviously women have had COVID as well, and some women have got long COVID. So there's
Mm.
all those issues. But I think as a country, how we build back from this, because I don't think anybody wants to go back to business as normal. I think the inequalities that we've seen starkly highlighted with COVID,
Mm.
that the more disadvantaged you are, the more likely it is that you're going to perhaps get COVID because you can't take time off from work and all of that and work from home. I think, yeah, what we do next, and the investments we make in the next few years are going to be really important. So investing in our young people, particularly who've perhaps missed out on some schooling, perhaps there is some
Mm.
mental health and well-being issues that we need to address with young people. The jobs market for young people, really big issue.
Mm.
Um, and also our NHS, that, we have an NHS that's really fit for purpose, and we value the men and women who work in the NHS, and we pay them properly, and we have proper careers for them, and
Yeah.
we have a proper plan for how many doctors and nurses and paramedics and everything else we need, because at the moment that's not working very well. And just finally, I think the environment, we need to be really conscious that we're heading towards an environmental catastrophe if we do not sort out some things very quickly. And in Hull and the Humber, we're very well placed in terms of a green economy and green jobs and offshore wind and all of that. And I think there's real potential for us in the city to take advantage of that and to get
Mm.
more women into those jobs as well. So it's not just men who've worked in the oil and gas industry who transfer into renewables and offshore wind, but we actually get some women coming through into those green jobs. So sorry, that's a kind of big picture of what I'd like to see post COVID, really.
Um, to go back to what you said earlier, you taught, and I'm really pleased you mentioned this, but obviously women championing other women into roles. For you personally, who's been inspirational to you along the way?
Well, quite a few women, really. But in terms of politics, one who stands out is Barbara Castle. And she was a Labour woman member of parliament. And in fact, she went on to be a member of the European Parliament as well. And people say she really should have been the first woman Labour leader of my party. That was in the 1970s. She was
Mm.
an incredibly articulate, intelligent woman. She had a flaming red hair, and she was always really beautifully turned out. And I remember it was a little before my time, but she was the minister who introduced seatbelts. So for years you could drive a car and you didn't have to wear a seatbelt, and for safety reasons she introduced it. And I always remember she was pilloried because she didn't drive. And she was introducing these seatbelts, and all the male drivers were like, "Oh, this is outrageous! This woman telling us to wear seatbelts." And of course, that change in policy has saved countless numbers of lives over the years. And she was just an incredible woman who, yeah, she inspired me. To someone who just went out there and got on with it and
Mm.
changed things for the better. And she was also actually the woman who argued that child benefit, as it was. Or it was called family allowance, I think, that should be paid directly to the mum and shouldn't just go
Mm.
into the pay packet of the man, if you like. So
Yeah.
she stood up for those kind of issues where a woman was able to say, if you pay that money to the mum, to the woman of the family, that money will be spent on the children. It won't go into what the man might want to spend it on, which may not be the children. So she's an amazing example of a good Labour woman.
Mm. Wow, inconceivable really to think that, money would be given to the man just to then spend how he
Yeah,
wanted, or to give an X amount
yeah,
to the mother of the children to then spend on the children. That's an
yeah.
amazing change. My last question for you, Diana, is a bit of a throwaway one, but it's one that I'm asking everyone this week just because it's had some really interesting answers. So it's, if you had a dinner party, what 5 guests would you invite? And they can be real or fictional or alive or dead. It's completely up to you.
Okay, well, thank you for that question, and it's and giving me advance notice of it, because it's been really hard to whittle this down to 5 names, but I've tried my best. So uh, this is my list. So first of all, Barbara Castle, for all the reasons I was just talking to you about. I think she'd
Mm.
just be a wonderful guest. I mean, sadly she's died, but I think she'd be an amazing guest to talk about her experiences after the Second World War and in Parliament and what she
Mm.
achieved. The next one I would like is a modern politician, actually, and they're not all politicians, it's just these two are. And that's Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister in New Zealand, who I think has been quite a brilliant example of
Mm.
leadership. She's led New Zealand through the COVID crisis and kept their numbers very low. And she's also someone who I think is incredibly empathetic and stands with people and by people. So I would ask for Jacinda Ardern. Maya Angelou.
Oh,
I
yes,
I love Maya Angelou's books and her
same.
poetry, and I would love to meet Maya Angelou.
Oh,
And another woman artist who I think is fantastic, and sadly isn't alive anymore, is Kirsty MacColl. I
oh,
just
yeah.
love her music. She died far too young, but
Mm.
I'd love to spend some time with her. And then I think the fifth one, I just thought I'd go local, and I'd really like the Bee Lady,
Oh,
Jean Bishop, because I think she's a remarkable woman. She's very local to us, and I'd like to hear her stories about life as well. So those are my five women, and I've just gone for women because it's International Women's Day. I wanted to
yeah.
celebrate the amazing women we've got.
That sounds incredible. You know, you've just taken me right back to secondary school there, where we were studying poetry, and my brilliant English teacher called Miss Spencer, she was fabulous, introduced us to Maya Angelou and read Still I Rise. And I still remember now the hairs on my arms going up, and I thought, oh my God, this writer is amazing. What an incredible human being Maya Angelou was and
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and that's a great poem. We should read that. We should read that every week, I think, and remind ourselves, no matter
Yeah.
what happens, still I rise. Yeah,
Absolutely. And sometimes, even now, if I'm going through a particularly difficult time, I will go back to that poem just to ground me and give me a bit of inspiration. It's a brilliant piece of work.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I could talk to you forever, Diana, but that is the end of our 30 minutes. Thank you so, so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And good luck with everything.
Thank you very much. And it's been lovely to have this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.